Good morning, happy Tuesday. Welcome to my Practical Rebels. Glad you are here to your early morning intuitive guidance. I'm Dr. Bonnie Nussbaum, and we are back to our book, Taking the War Out of Our Words, The Art of Powerful Non-Defensive Communication by Sharon Ellison. We haven't visited the book in a while, so and as I read this little section that comes up next, I can see why it's popping up. So this is going to be good. So let's just settle ourselves in. If you want to take a nice deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth, letting your shoulders drop in through the nose, a little deeper out through the mouth. This one's going to be a little deeper yet, in through the nose. Hold at the top, out through the mouth. Good morning, Lucy. Glad you are here. Welcome. You are first today. First one to pop on, so this is awesome. We're just settling in, getting our body tuned in with our breath. You know, by this time, having done a couple of nice deep breaths for days and days and days on end, it cues your body. Good morning, Beth. Glad you are here. That now is the time to settle in and focus and listen. It's kind of like when you start your bedroom routine. Good morning, Cindy. Glad you're here. It cues your body. Okay, time to settle down. She's brushing her teeth, putting on her pajamas. It's time to settle down. Same thing happens with us breathing first thing in the morning. Good morning, Judy. Glad you are here. So again, a couple of nice deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. Just to help those of you who are just popping on settle in also. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Wiggle a little bit. All right, so again, for those of you who are following along, we are back to our book, Taking the War Out of Our Words, and we are on page 197. And this section is called Consciously Committing to the Consequences We Predict. So not only is that a whole lot of alliteration, it is, good morning, Peggy, it is our opportunity to think about when we predict consequences. First of all, for those of us who are past the parenting years, we probably do this far less than we did when we had little kids in the house. But it's still a very useful tool, especially when we have people who push our buttons and light us up like a Christmas tree. Good morning, Carolyn. Glad you are here. So what I'm hoping with this book is, A, it gets you thinking about utilizing consequences as a tool, again, to set some healthy boundaries in your life. Wherever you're feeling like you're being run over by someone else, this is a place where this behavior, consequences, setting the consequences, can be useful. She's also talking in here about how just flinging out consequences willy-nilly is not going to serve you, and the importance of, and like I've said before, I've taught parents for 40 years, do not make a consequence. Do not set a prediction that you are not willing to follow through on. That does you far more harm than good, all right? So we're going to be talking about making the commitment to the consequences before you verbalize the prediction. How abandoning your commitment is breaking a promise, how abandoning your commitment creates a counter consequence. There's a price to pay if you don't follow through. And then the implementation of the predicted consequences, how to respond in a timely manner, how to respond without discussion. And she uses an example here, and then she gives you 3 ways of how to do this, how to implement it, how to make it happen. And that's the part we're going to stop at today. So for those of you following along, it's page 197. Consciously committing to the consequences we predict. A few years ago, a retired school teacher said to me, "Setting limits is like crossing the Rubicon. When Caesar went to war, he could still return to the safety of his own city until he crossed the Rubicon River. Once he did, he was past the point of no return, and he was essentially committed to the battle." That's that same idea that when you sail to the foreign land, if you're going to do battle, you burn your own ships at the shore. So you must fight in order to take over their ships to get back to where you came from. It's tactic, all right? And again, interesting, the war-based language, right? But There's the same thing in terms of the setting of the consequences. There comes that point of no return, and we want to utilize that to our advantage, all right? So here's what it goes. Making the commitment before verbalizing the prediction. It is important to make a commitment to ourselves first before we can communicate it clearly to another person. You know, when you had kids, you better stop that or I'm going to come over there, and you're sitting on the couch and you probably aren't moving, and they can read that. They know you're not moving. They're going to keep doing what they're doing until you get mad and then have to haul your sorry ass off the couch, right? Better to not predict it until you're ready to follow through. Either you stop fighting or I'm coming over there, and you mean it. They can tell the difference. They can tell the difference. With my kids, one of the little tools that I used was the count to 3 thing. If I started counting, they knew all hell was about to break loose. And I remember Logan at one point, he was little, maybe 3, popped his nook out of his mouth and said, "Boy, Mama, I'm glad you didn't get to 3. And I said, "I'm glad I didn't get to 3 too, Logan." So here's a dating circumstance. Connie had informed a man she was dating that she did not like always being the one to initiate contact. Quentin was willing to get together when she phoned, but he seldom took the initiative to call himself. Finally, she predicted, "If you don't call part of the time, then I will not make more than 2 calls before expecting you to make the next one." Okay, there's her prediction, her clear prediction. Now, let's see what happens when she's only waffly committed to that prediction she just made. Connie made 2 calls, and in keeping with her prediction, decided not to call Quentin again until he called her. The days turned into weeks, and she found herself anxiously waiting for him to call. Remember that teenage thing of sitting by the phone, waiting for it to ring? Several times she came close to calling him herself and then decided not to. One day, as she was sitting and watching the phone, she realized, if I follow through on what I predicted and he never calls me, I will never see him again. She decided her self-esteem was more important than seeing him. Good morning, Linda. Glad you are here. Although not seeing him would be painful. So there, she's finally drawing her line in the sand, right? I'm going to read that sentence again. If I follow through on what I predicted and he never calls me, I will never see him again. She decided her self-esteem was more important than seeing him, although not seeing him would be painful. Only at that moment did she make a full commitment to her prediction. So she made this prediction weeks earlier and was waffling within herself, not that he could see, but several minutes later, Quentin called, as if he sensed the shift in the firmness of her commitment. That doesn't surprise me at all. I know it surprises the people involved when that happens, but that doesn't surprise me at all. Energetically, people can tell where you're at. So here's a section called Abandoning Your Commitment is Breaking a Promise. A prediction is a promise. If we abandon a prediction after we have presented it to the other person, we essentially break a promise. If you promise to take your son swimming after he cleans his room and something prevents you, you will hear a long and loud protest. "But you promised!" Even when we fail to follow through on predicted consequences that the other person would rather avoid, we damage the trust in the relationship when we don't follow through. Yes, transpersonal knowing. We have that sense of knowing, right? When we don't follow through, we damage the relationship, regardless of whether those consequences would have been obnoxious, something we want to avoid, right? If Sandra gives in and deals with the bank when Jake bounces checks, she too is reneging on a promise. Okay, I want you to just let that kind of roll through your head, that idea that you are breaking a promise, not just to yourself, also to that other person. If you interrupt me when I'm talking, I'm not going to continue the conversation. If you continue the conversation, you have not only violated your own boundary, you violated a boundary that you set for them. Not healthy, not good. Okay. Abandoning your commitment also creates a counter consequence. If you fail to follow through on a prediction, you may think you have failed to set a limit. In actuality, you have simply established a different boundary from the one you verbalized. So you're setting the boundary anyway, either wittingly or unwittingly. Okay? If you tell your sister you won't give her any money unless she goes into the drug treatment center, and then you give in and give her just a little, you predict one thing and you do the opposite. Not healthy. Not healthy for either one of you. This counter consequence will act more powerfully than your hollow prediction. It's not about the words we say necessarily. It's about our actions. Actions speak louder than words. That old saw makes sense. Okay? So I remember working with a mom and her little boy about that, because she would say, go pick up your toys, and he'd throw a royal hissy, I'm not picking up the toys, you pick up the toys, blah, blah, blah. The whole while he was picking up the toys. So what she was really reacting to was his verbalizations, but the behavior was exactly what she wanted. So what I trained her to do was, when he got done picking up the toys, thanking him for picking up the toys. And pretty soon all that verbalization that he was doing while he was picking up the toys went away. She was responding to his words, but his actions were exactly what she had asked him to do anyway. Focus on that. Focus on that. This counter consequence will act more powerfully than your hollow prediction. Even if you only do it once, the person will expect, though perhaps unconsciously, the same consequence next time. Actions speak louder than words. If we renege on predictions, we will still react in ways that create specific consequences, but other people will respond to the unconscious conditioning instead of through conscious choice making. All right? So they're going to respond to our actions. They're not going to respond to our words. We cannot not create boundaries and consequences for others and ourselves. Okay? We can't not create boundaries and consequences for others and ourselves. Boundaries and consequences exist even if tacit and unstated. And in a minute, she's going to get into the point where she's talking about, if you stated them, it really would make things a whole lot easier. So let's see how that would look. If a bully kicks us in the shins and we do nothing, we create a boundary that allows abuse. Probably not many of us would want to predict out loud, if you kick me in the shins, then I will allow it. Or, if you tell me how to drive, then I will tell you I'm not going to answer you, and then I will argue with you anyway. If we put it into words, we can hear how that really sounds and go, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. We might evaluate our boundaries more thoroughly if we did make conscious statements about the ones we usually implement by default. So when we fall into a pattern of saying one thing and doing another, saying one thing and doing another, but we're not really spelling it out, we're not really speaking it, we kind of let ourselves off the hook. If we were to say that, I'm going to predict that I'm going to do this, but I'm actually going to do that, we could hear how dumb that sounds. By making a conscious commitment to our prediction, we can be clearer about the effects of our actions and how with others we create our joint reality. So now, implementing the predicted consequences. It's one thing to make the prediction, it's another thing to follow through. So let's learn a little bit about that. Our commitment to ourselves is tested when we follow through on a prediction we have made. We must also be careful about not falling back into any kind of power struggle, giving in, defending our actions, or blaming the other person. So watch how that happens, because oftentimes, especially for women, we throw in that extra verbalization, which undoes all the good stuff we've just laid out that we're going to do. So let me talk about that a bit. Responding in a timely manner. The timing of our response to a prediction is important. The cause and effect relationship is experienced most powerfully if the cause, the person's choice, and the effect, our response, are closely linked in time. You may predict to someone in your family who is arguing with you, if you only want to prove your own point, that I'm not going to discuss this issue with you right now. If you can talk to me about it openly and listen to what I have to say also, then I'd like to continue. There's the prediction, all right? The family member might respond, yes, but I know you are wrong about this. Good morning, Jeanette. Glad you are here. Jennifer, sorry, you're hiding in a box there. Glad you're here. All right. So that very moment after the first sentence is the time to terminate the discussion. Cut it off. If you say anything more, you will not implement the consequence as predicted. The consequence was, let me go back here. If you only want to prove your own point, then I'm not going to discuss this issue with you right now. Period. There's your thing. They kept going. Yes, but I know you are wrong about this. They're continuing to argue. Stop, stop, stop. You're at that point. You're at that point of no return, okay? It is sometimes hard to know how to put a consequence into effect without getting caught in a power struggle. A crucial part of the process is to carry out the predicted consequence with no discussion other than what is necessary to enact it. And I'm going to suggest to you that oftentimes no discussion is required at that point. All right? Sometimes this is difficult. If you predict that you will not continue to argue and a family member retorts, yes, but I know you are wrong about this, you have limited choices about how to respond if you are to adhere to your prediction. Thank you for the butterfly. Very cool. Following are 3 different approaches you might take. So check these out and let's see what you would pick for yourself. Which one chimes for you, resonates the most, etc. First one is simply stop talking about the topic and not answer the person. You could respond to the argumentative statement with silence. You might walk away, pick up a book and read, or even change the subject and talk about something else because you have not said you wouldn't talk at all. You just said you wouldn't talk about that subject. So if you and we do that, don't we? Oh, look at the weather. See that bird over there? We change the subject, all right? So simply stop talking about the topic and not answer the person, not respond to that bait of, yes, but I know you are wrong about this. Don't take the bait. Number 2. Maintain silence regarding the topic under discussion, but make some kind of a transition statement. For example, I'm going to quit talking about this subject now. You don't want to add because you are still arguing. The person knows that. They know they're continuing. They know they're dangling the bait for you to continue to argue. And it is easy for that additional comment, because you are still arguing, to sound blaming. So further, it can incite a new angle to the argument, such as, have we all heard this one? I'm not arguing, I'm just telling you what I think. That's arguing. If there is actually a need to define what you mean by arguing, you can do that with questions and statements before you make your prediction, or at some point later after you have followed through on your prediction at hand. So don't get into the nitty-gritty of this thing in that moment. It weakens your position. You just need to follow through at that point, okay? So then if they say, well, I didn't think I was arguing, now is not the time to discuss what arguing means. Let that go. Do something else. Later, you can come back and say, okay, let's have a discussion now about what constitutes arguing, all right? So you have to follow through on the prediction at hand. Then what comes after can unfold as it will. Once you say, I'm going to quit talking now, both people have a moment of transition time. You need to be done talking about that. Got it? So that's the second one. Maintain silence regarding the topic under discussion, but make that transition statement. I'm going to quit talking about this subject now. Number 3, you can make a second prediction. State it either following the transition statement, which she prefers, or by itself. If you decide later that you want to talk to me about this without arguing, then let me know and I will continue the discussion. So you're laying the groundwork for what can happen. So if you clean your room, by the time it's time to go to swimming, I will take you swimming. If you choose, and remember from the predictions we did before, you do both parts. If you choose not to clean your room by the time we leave for swimming, we're not going swimming. Period. All right. So then you could, in this case, you could add in the second one. If you don't clean your room by the time we would choose to go to swimming, we're not going swimming. But if you clean your room in the interim next week at this time, we can go swimming. So you're putting something in there that kind of points out what will happen should they follow through, but not follow through in the timeline you've laid out. Okay? I have found that any discussion, clarification, or argument at the time a consequence is to be implemented will severely disable that consequence. We want these consequences. If we're willing to put the time and effort into trotting them out there, we want them to be as powerful as possible. So hear that sentence again. I have found that any discussion, clarification, or argument at the time the consequence is to be implemented will severely disable it. And I can see the little gears turning. Yeah, but. No. Just go with that. And it's hard for us. We want to offer explanation and another chance and all that stuff. Don't do it. You will be your most powerful when you put the consequence out there, when you make your prediction. If you do A, I will do B. If you do C, I will do D. You've put it out there. And following through immediately, not getting caught up in any of the gaminess that we all like to play. Even a single word or sentence can undo the power of a consequence. If you say, I don't think I'm wrong, so I'm not going to continue talking to you about this, you have already contradicted your prediction because, however briefly, you have become defensive and you've argued back. And it's kind of what we've been trained to do, isn't it? Who's going to get the last word? Who's going to get the last word? You got to let that stuff go. Got to let that stuff go, okay? Not only does this violate the boundary you set and break your own commitment to the prediction, it also means you have attempted to get in the last word before you stopped talking, which the other person will rightfully take as an effort to win the power struggle. I'm hoping some little lights are going on for you going, oh yeah, that makes sense, that makes sense. Any continued response on your part, even a sarcastic sure, will encourage the other person to attempt further to get you to alter the consequences you have predicted. Glad this is useful, Lucy. Glad it's helpful. Because again, I don't care how much training we've all had, and most of us have had a lot. We're human, and we play these games too. And so calling it out like it is really important for us to go, yeah, wait a minute, I'm doing that. Time to stop. Time to stop. Good morning, Jean. Glad you are here. Good morning, Mel. Glad you are here. We're just about done. I think I've got one paragraph left, but this one is so worth going back and watching because this is something we all get caught in, and these are the keys to getting uncaught. It can be difficult, especially at first, to follow through immediately and without discussion when it is time to implement a consequence. The first time Doug predicted he would stop talking if Virginia continued to interrupt, even though they had discussed the whole process with her in a session, she practically begged him to finish what he was saying, and he gave in. But the next time he kept his promise. Once we have made the same prediction several times, it usually gets easier not to give in and to get caught up in a discussion that pulls us back into the power struggle. All right? Absolutely. Even if we don't perfectly implement each consequence we predict, I cannot overestimate the importance of being precise about how we do it. It's the same precision we expect when we fix an automobile or send a letter, type a letter. We want to be, and it's interesting because there are people who, that's a good enough job. That's good enough. Everybody has their line for what's good enough. But what she's saying is with this stuff, when you make a prediction, the more immediately you follow through on the consequence, the more clearly you follow through on the consequence, the less you engage in fluff and talk and explanation and whatever else, the more powerful that consequence will be. And I'm going to suggest to you, oftentimes, you only have to deliver that consequence once, and it's a done deal. When they know you're going to follow through. That used to drive my sister and my mother crazy with my kids. why do they listen to you so well? Why don't they listen to us? Because I follow through on the consequences I predict. You guys waffle. So when you waffle, you are literally shooting yourself in the foot. They're going to, that's just her. She's just, nobody. But when you have that momentum of, I say what I mean and I mean what I say, people know that. People read that. They feel that. And responses will be according. You save yourself a whole lot of headache when you do that. All right? So that's where I'm going to stop for today. I hope this was helpful. You might have to listen to it a couple of times because, again, it sort of runs counter to what a lot of us have done for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But hopefully it was helpful. Have an awesome day on this fine Tuesday. We'll see you again tomorrow. Remember, you're capable of far more than you think you are. Bye-bye.